All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you here with us today and to welcome Brenda Lewis to our presentation today. Brenda is going to be talking about hiring international teachers. Brenda is currently the superintendent in Fridley, and she has been, I think, instrumental in facilitating some new conversation around international teachers. I know Bill Adams presented at one of our conferences last year around the experience that they've had, but I think Brenda's going to continue the conversation in some new ways. So welcome everyone, and we will get started with Brenda Lewis. Take it away, Brenda.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks, Dave, for hosting me. It's an absolute delight to be here with all of you. And as Lori said, I am here to share with you one prong that can be very helpful as we work to address the severe shortage that we are all feeling in our K through 12 school districts. Today, the bulk of my presentation will focus on teachers. However, at the very end, I will talk a little bit with you about process for paras. I am also very much open to questions in the chat box, all of that, but I'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions as well. I wanted to first share with you how I started this program. It was when I was in Grand Forks, North Dakota as an assistant superintendent. I had the absolute pleasure of overseeing our special education programming. And one day in April, the director came to me and said, Brenda, we have 30 teacher vacancies within special education and 0 applicants in our pool. And I will forever remember that day. And I knew, being in Grand Forks, that when you combine the weather, the geographical location, we're going to have a really tough sell. And Grand Forks had been experiencing shortages in special education for many years, and this was kind of the culmination. So I racked my brain and started thinking back to a time when I was in Washington, D.C. public schools. And I was a principal there, and we actually had individuals in our schools that DC public schools had recruited and sponsored internationally. So on just a kind of a whim, I approached my superintendent and said, hey, we have nobody. I think we need to start looking at international. And that's how the program was born. I've definitely, today, as you hear me talk, I will make it seem like it's something you'll hear a lot of information and all of that. Please understand, I've been at this for 3 years. So please don't expect that you have to be an expert or these pieces today. And I'm very much happy and do this currently to talk to superintendents, HR directors, whatever that might look like for your district to really help. So with that, Dave, I'll have you advance the slide, please. All right, so I'm going to focus specifically today on H-1B visas. Sometimes some of us call the immigration and visa sponsorships a little bit of alphabet soup, but by the time we're done here today, you'll understand what I mean by H-1B. Next slide, please, Dave. H-1B gives you the ability to sponsor any position in your organization where the job description requires a 4-year degree or higher. This is not a visa that you can use for paraprofessionals. It's not a visa you can use for custodians. Even if the people you hire have a 4-year degree, you still can't use that because the visa type goes by the position. With that being said, I'll talk a little bit later, as I said, about how to have some of those positions sponsored that do not require a 4-year degree. The whole heart of the H-1B visa program is really for employers, and this goes beyond school systems, who have shortages within workforce. This is not something where you can seek solely international. So you have to have had no qualified domestics to then be able to sponsor an international. For most of us, we don't have qualified domestics enough to fill our teaching vacancies. The positions that I have worked to sponsor, special education, all disability categories, all settings from setting 3 and down. I do have some of the intermediates that I've been working with as well, and they sponsor setting 4 as well. And just as an aside, if I have any colleagues here from intermediates, we have been able to be successful with PELSB, the Minnesota Licensing Board. And I know that for setting 4s, we can't have that ABS licensure. So if you hire the right candidate, which I'll share with you how to do that, we are able to get them full setting 4 within that disability category. So I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Then I've had experience hiring high school English, middle school social studies, math, Head Start, elementary ed, deaf and hard of hearing, visually impaired, counselors. Now I have some social workers in the pipeline, building substitutes. This was a little bit of a sticky one. So when I talk about building substitutes, I don't mean through an agency, because that agency would have to sponsor them. I mean through Fridley Public Schools or through your school system. We have what I think many districts, some districts have, is building subs, where they're maybe working on a 175-day contract, a smaller number of days, but still potentially on like step 1 of your teacher contract, still get benefits, all of that. We initially, United States Citizens Immigration Services had a bit of a problem with us wanting to sponsor that. And I was very adamant that the whole heart and soul of this work around visa sponsorships is to fill those vacancies. And again, 4-year degree required, et cetera. And our building subs, we do require a 4-year degree. So we actually appealed the decision and we won. So anyone now in the US, any school system that wants to sponsor building subs, as long as your job description calls for a 4-year degree, and again, this is not daily subs, this is your building subs, you'll be able to sponsor them too. And this has been a huge win for our school system. We're picking up 4 more international teachers today from the airport. And when we are done with all of our arrivals, we will have 14 building subs in our district, 13 are international. And in a district of 2,600, I think that tells you, because we were having not the best fill rates in our subs. And this has made such a difference, not only with quality of instruction, having our vacancies filled on absences, but also with our morale. We're not having teachers having to have as much of the missed planning and prep and all of that, dividing the classrooms and from 5 sections to 4. It has been a game changer for Fridley Public Schools. Next slide, please. H-4 visas. One of the benefits too of this program is for your recipients that the district has been awarded an H-1B, so your teachers primarily, they will then be able to bring a spouse or a domestic partner, however their country defines that, with them, and dependents 21 and under. So you also will likely have students within your school system that are H-4 visa holders from your international teachers, and Fridley has 2 so far. We had several in Grand Forks Public Schools, so that's another added bonus, is that you have international students that are coming in. And we only hire teachers that are fluent in English, and that's a question I sometimes get, is, oh, we need this student to be in receiving English language learner support. And our international teacher dependents, while you can certainly go through that process, we have not had any students that need that because they're fluent in English. Next slide, please. Um, so the H-1B overview, I've talked a lot about this, but I'll just go a little bit more in depth. This is for skilled individuals who are considered experts in their home country. That means have a bachelor's or above within their home country that is then U.S. equivalency. And I'll talk about something called the NACES evaluation in just a few slides and talk about that. I personally really like the H-1B. As I talked about in the beginning, this is one prong of the work towards how to really fill our vacancies and the shortages that we have. This is not something that's a 1-year type of program, which you'll oftentimes hear of J-1 visas. That's 1-year program that's renewable 3 times, and then that's it. The H-1B, it's initially a 3-year visa, and then the district can choose to renew it for a second 3 years. And then after that, 6 years, then you don't have the ability to renew it. However, an option here for the H-1B that Fridley Public Schools is going to be doing is the pathway to green card or permanent residency. So we have designed a rubric that really goes through when we are ready to invite our folks that are being sponsored by H-1Bs, and this is an individual invite, when we're ready to invite them for us to sponsor them for their green card. And Fridley, it's going to be unlikely for us that we would renew for a second 3 years. We'll just pathway that to a green card. And then what happens once your H-1B recipients are able to have a status adjustment to a green card permanent residency, they no longer need to have that work authorization from you. Now, that might make some folks nervous, like, what if they leave us? That definitely is a risk. What I have found, though, is our international talent is so loyal. They're so thankful. They love their jobs. We treat them really, really well. They want to stay with us. And there's also provisions built into that if there is a way where that person chooses to leave your district, you can also work with them once you've done that green card sponsorship, work with them on some payback provisions on that. You can't do that for an H-1B visa fees, but you can do that when you move to a permanent residency. Next slide, please. This is a lot here. And Lori and Dave are going to send this slide deck out after. You can click on there's some hyperlinks in here for you as well. These are all the requirements of the H-1B. This is very overwhelming. You don't need to worry about this. With my level of experience, I still use an immigration attorney to do this side of the work with me. So this is just something to make sure that you have this. Sometimes there's questions where community members might say, are you bringing in international candidates at the cost of domestics? It probably won't come across that clear. It might come across as you're giving jobs to foreigners, or you are trying to save money. And this absolutely cannot happen for the H-1B. So there's something that you do called a labor condition application. And again, your attorney can do this work with you. And I'll talk about cost at the end of the presentation too, so that you kind of have a benchmark on that. The LCA is your initial application to the U.S. Department of Labor. So even before it gets to the U.S. Citizens Immigration Services, which is the agency that ultimately awards the visa, they say to the district, okay, have you duly advertised this? Have you vetted all domestic candidates, etc.? They don't actually interview you. This is just filled out on a form. And then once you have proven that, then their responsibility actually changes. So they move from ensuring that all domestic workers have been vetted and ensured that those jobs have been offered to qualified domestics first. Then they switch to, are you giving the international candidate, the H-1B recipient, the same salary that you would be giving someone, say it's master's plus 45, step 8? giving the same person that? Are they getting the same benefits, etc.? So our international talent have a right to all of the same benefits, the same pay, the ability to join the union, all of that you would see for our domestic. Really, when you think about international candidates, the only difference that I make in my mind is that I know I have to have that authorization for them to work here. Otherwise, everything else is the same. But just wanted to give this to you because sometimes you might get some of that community questioning. And I just literally say, I don't get that here in Fridley, to be honest, but I got it a lot in Grand Forks. And I literally say, well, that would be an illegal practice and I couldn't do that. And then I share the information around the process. Next slide, please, Dave. So this looks pretty simple. It is simple if you work with people to help you on it, but it can also be very overwhelming. So your first step I just talked about is where you have an LCA or a labor condition application that's approved by the U.S. Department of Labor. Then you file a petition with U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. That's about a 36-pager. So again, can be overwhelming at first, but once you get into the rhythm, and again, I'll say it again with your legal counsel, they do all of this work for you. And then once you get approved through that, then you submit a different form, and that generates the ability for your talent to be interviewed through one of the embassies or consulates abroad. I don't say the one, so for example, they are Ghanaian citizen. If they're living in Thailand, which is going to be common for you because international talent, they potentially are not working in their country of citizenship. They do not have to go back to Ghana for their interview at the U.S. Embassy. They can have their interview in Thailand or whatever the country they are residing in. I'll take the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit here about hiring teachers from the Philippines. So all of the countries that I have worked with, and I haven't worked with every country, but I have sponsored from a number of countries already. Once you get awarded that H-1B, your international teacher goes in, they get their visa, interview, they're approved, they come back in 5 days, they pick up their passport that has that stamp in, they're free to travel. There's nothing from their government that they need to do or we as the employer needs to do. However, teachers from the Philippines, there's an additional process. They have to have Philippines overseas labor clearances. And what needs to happen initially is the school system or the employer needs to be an accredited agency that's able to hire and employ Philippine workers. And this is something where, again, I work with an agency and I have their information here at the end of our document that you'll get. There's different Philippine agencies out there. If you are new to this international talent work, I would highly, highly recommend that you connect with me offline and I can help you. But also, I would highly recommend that you use Dan and Claire Johnson, which is, again, you'll get their contact information. Even this morning, I got a very long email because it's known that Fridley Public Schools is an accredited employer in the Philippines, and our name is out there. And I got a very long email from a Filipino firm that does recruitment and this process. And some of those recruitment firms, you just have to be very careful because some are predatory. They may not necessarily be predatory to the U.S. employer, but I found they've been predatory to the teachers. For example, the Filipino teachers charging them immense rates up front and then not having jobs for them and things like that. So I would just use caution here to use either a firm that someone else has used or the firm that I'm recommending. One of the benefits that I've had that I wasn't prepared for is once Grand Forks Public Schools was advertised as an employer, and I don't even mean advertised in Grand Forks Public Schools, advertised in the Philippines as being an accredited employer. I went from, remember that April day when I had 0 candidates? I was getting so many emails, and the Philippines are 13 or 14 hours ahead of us, depending on daylight savings time. I was getting so many emails overnight that I had to shut off my preview on my cell phone because my phone wouldn't fully charge because it was constantly lighting up. I was getting about 1,500 cold call emails a week of candidates. And while that was a great problem to have, it posed a different problem that all of a sudden our application pools went from 0 to in the thousands. And that is very hard to screen through all of those. And then I worked with Dan and Claire on the recruitment side to really help me. What they were able to do is they were able to narrow down, and I would say to them, I need DCD setting 3. And they would narrow down to only the people that we knew we could get that tier 4 licensure on, because I didn't want to deal with any licensure below that. And they would screen those candidates and they would really vet them. We also did candidates that were more non-traditional school psychs. They would screen them very much, SLPs. And that really helped us. You may ask, Brenda, why are you talking so much about teachers from the Philippines? There are so many teachers from the Philippines that really want to come and teach in our schools. And when I was in Grand Forks, I actually started tapping my network. I had been a principal in China several years ago. So I started to reach out, and I was at an international school. So I started to reach out to colleagues that I had worked with there when I was the principal. And so I was able to get candidates from Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, London, and so on and so on and so on. And so Australia, not all of those candidates came to fruition, but many did. Then I met Dan and Claire actually through our attorney when we started to have Filipino talent that wanted to come to us. Now, I was hired and started here in Fridley in July, and the timing, I didn't have enough time to really work to get our candidates here on time, to work with those other countries as well, because all of the talent that I have internationally are up in Grand Forks. And of course, I didn't want to, work on robbing Grand Forks of the talent that we had just worked so hard to get there. And Dan and Claire were right there, and they did all of that. They have candidates at the ready and so forth. And I just feel very confident in the work that we do with them. We've had ultimate success. Now, our international program right now in Fridley is 100% Filipino. We are looking to expand that. But again, I give you caution. Just be careful that you don't end up in situations where maybe you have candidates that aren't licensable, or you have candidates that don't have quite the right degree. And then you enter into a situation where maybe USCIS won't approve them. So I'm not saying to not take candidates from all over the world, which is what we want to be doing in addition to our Filipino candidate, but just have a word of caution that you do have to screen those candidates really, really well. And once you work on this a few times, you'll get really smart and savvy about how to do that well. And again, I can't say it enough. I'm here to help because we all benefit when we have these this prong of high quality international talent. Next slide, please. All right. You heard me talk just a little bit about the J1. Some districts do use J1s. I am not against a J1. It just hasn't seemed to work for what I am looking for. You'll see J1s a lot when it comes to immersion programs. I think that's a really good place to use J1s. You bring the talent for 1 year, maybe up to 3 years, and then you bring in someone different if you have like a French immersion. I'm really looking for longer term solutions. I don't want to have in our programming this in and out of teachers. I don't want to have just a body to fill for that year. I want them part of our staff for the long term. And again, when it comes to special education, you really want our teachers to be deeply invested. You want them in every area, but with special education, you really want them invested. And it's hard if you turn them over year over year. The other piece with J1s is if your district was not a J1 sponsor prior to 2017, USCIS won't grant you to be a J1 visa sponsor. So you actually have to go through an agency. And the J1s have exploded because it's not the demand. It's not just for school systems. It's also for any employer in the US to apply for, and the government has caps on J1s. And with those caps, there's not enough. So you might have an agency that works with candidates of yours, and your candidate will say, I already have a J1 waiting for me. And that company has received maybe 50 J1s through the USCIS lottery, but yet they've promised 800. And you'll find out in about August that your person or employees didn't get J1s. So then you can't have them. So you can't have them work for you. So that's why I prefer the H1B. For some districts, though, a J1 may be the right solution for you, or a combination of a J1 and an H1B. Next slide, please. The application process. If you are thinking about doing this, start with your application process. And I would encourage you to either apply into it yourself or find someone else, but apply as someone that's not living in the US and doesn't have US credentials. So simple things like, does it accept non-US phone numbers? What about the address? Does it lock you into a zip code? Does it automatically go to US? Does it lock you into a state? If you use the term letters of recommendation with many international candidates, you'll get a blank stare. That's just not something that's common vernacular outside of that. So either fool your system and have something that tell your international candidates, just put a note in there that says letter of recommendation available on request, because it won't advance them into that application if you don't do that. Otherwise, just remove that altogether from your application. Also, make additional uploads available. I've talked about this NACES evaluation a little bit. NACES is an accrediting agency that is recognized by United States Citizens Immigration Services. And what they do is they take non-US transcripts and they evaluate them to US equivalency. So this, number one, is required to get a H1B application approved. It's also required for them to get their Minnesota teaching licensure. Also, you can use this then for placement on your salary schedule. So that'll help you. Are they BA plus 45? Are they MA? Are they MA plus 15? So that'll really help you as well. So just make sure that you really look at your application process. And I'm sorry to say this, but I bet most of you don't have systems that are compatible, because in the districts I've worked in, we haven't either. So that's an immediate barrier for international folks, is the application won't work for them. So make sure you work in your application software to get that updated to be international friendly. Next slide, please. The screening process. I talked a little bit about this. Again, this is a little bit of a funny story. The day after I was named in Fridley Public Schools, all of a sudden Fridley's pools went from 0 to a wealth of Filipino candidates, but the school district didn't know why. And they didn't, of course, talk to me at that point. And we found out later. So it's so funny to see how when you get your name out there as a sponsor, both individually as well as your organization, how that traveled. So Fridley all of a sudden had all these Filipino candidates and they had no idea why. But that brings me to the point of what I talked about a little bit earlier. You're going to get a ton of unsolicited emails. And for us, we've been dealing with this hiring process for a long time, right? And we've gotten to a point where I think some of us have a scarcity mindset. I certainly did. And that means that we'll basically take anyone that comes across that has the appropriate credentials and is licensable and passes a background check. I would encourage you not to do that. I would encourage you to really be thorough in your screening processes. And again, this is where we use our agency to really help us and to run that process on the screening. Because you're going to get a wealth of people that apply, and that's going to be really exciting for you, but also you might just make some mistakes along the way and end up in places like I have, where you run into those issues on maybe getting a tier 2, tier 3 license when you really don't need to. Only take the people that will get a tier 4 license. And I can help you with that offline when if your district is exploring that. Also in Grand Forks, we had so many qualified applicants for our general ed elementary positions. I screened out anyone below 9 years of experience and anyone below an MA plus 45. And absolutely no one even got into any screening that didn't have elementary education as their degree. So that just tells you the power of the candidates that you will receive. Next slide, please. Okay. Some of you may already do this. I'm guessing many of us don't. If you are not doing offer letters, you will need to do offer letters for your international talent. That's required by the Department of Labor and United States Citizens Immigration Services. Your offer letter has to be on school district letterhead. It has to have the location of the job. It has to have the salary and the job title. So for us, we have 2 elementary schools. It has to say Fridley Public Schools, Stevenson Elementary, grade 1, $56,412. Special education setting 3 ASD program. That's what you would see. And I really caution you to not change these assignments. So make sure that you are very sure that that's where you want your international talent, because if you make a change, it's doable to make a change. It just kicks your timeline back. And I'll talk about timeline in just a little while here. Here, once you get the slides, you'll see that link to the NACES evaluation. Start that immediately. And one of the things that I do is I harp on our international candidates. Once they're hired, I stay on top of them because they're so excited, but it's a really overwhelming process. So work with them to get that NACES evaluation done. That takes a while, and that can really slow you up because you can't submit for an H-1B until they have a Minnesota licensure. And the NACES is really what drives all of this. So the minute they have that job offer, do the NACES. Some of your candidates will already have a NACES. So ask them if they have that evaluation already. Immediately begin that licensure process with them. I would recommend someone on the HR team or in smaller districts, maybe the superintendent, the principal, just work with them on how to do that PELSB license. PELSB has really gotten great with us. It took a little bit of time with the international program, but they have gotten great. So now they expect this and they know how to do that, but really hold the hand of your candidate, because that's an overwhelming process, I think, for domestics. It's really overwhelming for internationals. And then develop a relationship with the management company or landlord. I'm going to step away for a second. I have motion lights and my lights went off and it's so dark. So I'm going to get my motion lights back on so that you can actually see me a little better. 1 second here. Okay. Always good to save energy, but when you don't make enough movement, things like this happen, right? Um, One of the things I did early was develop a relationship with a management company or landlord. Please hear me when I say, do not pay deposits, do not pay for apartment background checks, don't float first month rent, don't give loans. And I know that sounds a little bit harsh. If you don't do that for your domestics, do not do that for your internationals. That will cause issues within the international program where some domestics will say, well, why did they get that? And I didn't get it. So I would caution you on that. Also, I would be happy if anyone would like to contact me with how I did this. It is very important for you to have, and the international talent can choose wherever they want to live. The district doesn't dictate that, but if you give them a suggestion of where to live, work with a landlord that's trustworthy, that you know, or a management firm that is open and welcoming of internationals. Also, you might get into some situations where they say things like, well, they have to have a social security number. That's absolutely not true. And your talent will eventually get a social security number within about 6 weeks after they arrive. They'll get their card. You can get their social security number. They'll get it within like 3 days if you take them back to the social security office. But there's a lot of management companies that'll take advantage, unfortunately, of international talent. So I work directly with a few management companies. I provide that information to our talent. And I also work with Dan and Claire on this too. They help from their side too. And then what happens is if our candidates choose that management company or that place to live, that landlord, we are able to furnish the apartments fully with 100% donations. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I have some forms for you too that you can model after. And I'll share with you how to do that. Also, how to do that without upsetting your domestic talent as well. But then if you have this relationship, you can get those keys ahead of time and set the apartment up, because remember, your talent is getting off the plane with 2 check bags and a carry-on. And they're going to be exhausted. Also, I think it's a lot to ask them to then pay for a hotel for a while. You certainly can, but that's a piece. Also, some communities are harder than others. Grand Forks, we did not have the ability to have furnished apartments. However, here in Fridley, our first talent that arrived, they are in furnished apartments. Now we don't have that same vacancy. There's not enough of those furnished apartments. So now we're furnishing the apartments. But if it can work for you to have apartments that are close to that work site, have them furnished. That piece really helps. Another piece too is remember your talent won't have vehicles. And for some more in rural, or some of us even in Fridley, the bus, it takes a while. Grand Forks, the bus only came once an hour, and that took a while. I will talk about too later on in this presentation about pathway to independence too, because I don't want this to be a situation where our talent ends up constantly getting rides from domestics, and I'll talk domestic teachers, and I'll talk about that in a minute why. The next piece I wanted to talk about is make sure your school board's on board. Talk to them about this. They have had multiple presentations from me, both in Grand Forks and here, on international talent, so that when they're in the grocery store and someone says, "What are you doing bringing all these foreigners over?" Your school board members can say, well, we are only able to offer jobs to international talent when there aren't qualified domestics. And we work through the U.S. Department of Labor and Citizens Immigration Services to legally sponsor these candidates. And aren't you excited that we're fully staffed in Fridley Public Schools? And by the way, this also brings more diversity cultural, and racial into our district. So that really helps. And when you bring it to them early, they get so excited and they want to do it. I also, for those that want, I have recordings from both here and Grand Forks that I can send you to if you want to see that, as long as the slides of how I approach that. Also have your union leadership on board. I'm in a position here in Fridley where our union does so much of the work on the donations, collecting, the moving in. It's phenomenal. They're so excited. Just make sure they understand, A, what is the point of this? B, the piece about the domestic. C, they can also be members of the union. And D, they want our positions filled too. So it just really makes for good programming, a good way to fill your vacancies, but please make sure you don't just do this without building the understanding well before you even have your teachers arrive. Next slide, please. Supports. Okay. From an employment legal standpoint, you don't have to do any of these things. You can simply have your candidate sponsored. You pay the legal fees, you pay the USCIS fees. If you do Filipino sponsorship, you pay those fees, and then you're done. You don't have to pick up your talent at the airport. You don't have to help them finding apartments. You don't have to show them how to get to work. None of that. However, I think we all want to retain our staff, right? And we want them to feel warm and welcomed. So these are the supports that we provide. We have a recommended bank. And again, in these linked resources, you'll see it's built out for Fridley under the International Talent Resources. Dave, do you mind just clicking on that for me? Yep, perfect. So you'll see here, and Dave, just click on like slide 5 for me. This is just an example of what we provide to our candidates. Like, here's options of how to get a SIM card, etc. Scroll down a little bit more there, Dave. I'm looking for the apps slide, if you don't mind. Keep going here. Okay, right here. Then we show you how to use delivery apps and those things through this guide. So this is something that you can readily turn into what makes sense for your community. I constantly remind our talent to use this because it really shows them exactly different tools, especially when it's the middle of winter. They can have that food delivered right to them, etc. Do you want to click on slide 19 for me? Here it shows them exactly how to use the Uber app as well. Okay, thanks, Dave. I'll have you click back to our regular deck there. Thank you. One of the pieces we also do is we have a recommended bank. If they choose to use our bank, we take them there and we help them. We make appointments ahead of time. We take them to the Social Security office. Again, you don't have to, but we take them to the Social Security office once they complete the online application, which we help them with. We then take them there and file the paperwork there. And then it's 6 to 8 weeks typically until their card arrives. But if you bring them back, there's my lights again. If you bring them back to the Social Security office, they'll write their number on a sticky note and give it to your teacher. So then you can have that. Also on our payroll side, we fool our system for a little while and we put in the SSN as like 000 or 111, whatever. So we do that so that their pay isn't delayed as well. We also show them how to operate their stove, their thermostat, their washer dryer, how to lock their door, all those pieces that we naturally instinctively think about. We show them also. Remember, I shouldn't say remember, I have not had a talent that came that had ever seen snow or ice. So we help them to walk on the snow and ice. And I know that sounds odd, but you don't instinctively know how to do that. So we help them with that as well. So we do mentoring, just a lot of different things that we do. I'm going to ask you, Dave, to click on what says Fridley Education Association donation solicitation. Thank you. So we do ask for donations, and this is driven by our union. Here in Grand Forks, it wasn't. And we put out what we need to outfit the apartments, and people sign up. So you can see here things that you wouldn't think of, like shower rods, shower curtains, shower hooks, napkins, bath towels, those types of things. And we do this 100% through donation. Now, we also, donation to me means giving a dresser. It also means people will donate gift cards. Some will donate cash. And so we take all donations. What I will say here, and I can work with you if you start this program in your district, don't just put it out there and then get your talent from the airport and then be ready. What you're going to end up with is a lot of dressers, but you're not going to have any mattresses, and you're not going to have any shower curtains. So you really need to think about, how do we provision each apartment well? Dave, if you can go back to the main deck. Also, can you click on that supplies for international talent for me? Okay, this is the same thing. My apologies. I was thinking that was something different. I'll have you click back out. So the donation solicitation is really something that I think welcomes well. I will tell you this much. I did have a moment in Grand Forks Public Schools where a current teacher was very upset that she didn't have access to the donations as well. So I invited all district employees to go and look at the donations that we have and to take them. No one took me up on that. And these donations, they're not junk, but it's like, things that people are donating that they no longer want in their homes. So a lot of the couches that you'll get have hide-a-beds, which are so heavy, but it's that durable furniture. In Grand Forks, we had a centralized room, and it was kind of a flashback to the 80s, but that furniture from the 80s really lasts a long time, and it's durable. And then what we have is, once you get into second and third years of your international talent coming, they start to buy their own stuff, and then they hand me down to the new candidates coming in, and they also help with the onboarding. One of the things too I wanted to talk with you about is make sure that your interviews are international friendly. Dave, if you can click on that special ed teacher interview questions. Please don't ask your candidates. Please talk about the due process timelines that you would follow and how you engage the IEP team. A better way to say that would be, please describe how you ensure that our students with disabilities receive the services that they're legally entitled to, and how do you involve both your teacher colleagues and professionals, as well as the family in the process. You're asking the same thing, but explaining it differently. So these are questions for your consideration if you'd like to use those. Again, gets you to the same point, but we take out that American terms that we use for special education. Okay, we'll go back to the main deck here. I just have a few more points, and then I'd love to open it up for questions. Next slide here, Dave. Points to ponder. Is your district actually ready? I want you to really think about, racially, are you ready? Are you ready for candidates to be here that are racially identified differently than white? Are you ready to ensure that there's cultural belonging in your district? Those conversations are hard, and this doesn't come out as, I don't want my student in a classroom with a Filipino teacher. This comes out as, my child isn't able to understand the accent of that teacher. I think these are conversations you need to have. Some districts, many probably have already had that when it comes to our diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work, but just make sure that you're ready, and make sure that as the leader, you're ready to have those tough conversations about, is this an issue with race? Is this an issue with culture? And really do that. And you'll also get some of that from staff members too. So make sure that you're ready to have those conversations. How do you onboard? Are you ensuring that our staff feels belonging? Even simple things like health savings account, insurance, high deductible plan. What are you filing for taxes? All of those things, please make sure that you take that extra time with international talent because that's all different. And how do you do that well? How are you going to fund this? So in Fridley Public Schools, for our Filipino recruiting fees, and our Dan and Claire Johnson that do that work for us, we use that, and it's under IDEA reimbursable for the special ed positions, and then we use general fund. We are currently working with Minnesota Department of Education because our lawyer fee, they are not letting us put it in IDEA reimbursable, but I know that we'll get there. There's just some confusion when you hear the term lawyer, they think due process lawyer when it's really the same as when you pay like a consulting fee to get an SLP. So I know we'll get there. So all of you will benefit from that you'll be able to put it into your IDEA reimbursable pot as well. And then for your non-special ed positions, just find a funding source. For that, I just use general fund piece where I would normally hire. I'll talk about costing in a second. Next slide, please. What about paras? Fridley Public Schools has had a great success with what's called an H3 non-immigrant trainee or special education exchange visitor visa. And that is an 18-month visa where we're able to bring trainees, and we have a full training program for them done by our staff and our team. And they are able to do that training program, and they function as paras. The kicker on this is there's only 50 visas in the US available per year. So Dr. Deb Henton and I met with Amy Klobuchar's team to really talk about the need to lift that visa cap. So more to come on that. But Fridley has had great success with this, and we're very excited about it. Every H3 application we put in, we have been able to obtain that. So we're up to almost 15 approvals, which is wonderful. This is a game changer for us. However, you can't use that visa for general ed paraprofessionals, but it helps with special education. We're also going to use this as our pipeline program. We are only hiring individuals that are able to get that Tier 4 a special education license, have a bachelor's or beyond degree, and then we'll pipeline them right over into an H-1B. So that's how we're doing kind of our grow your own pipeline program. Then there's the H-2B program that we could use. It's kind of like shoving a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit, but we can use that for your paraprofessionals as well. I'm happy to talk with you offline. This is also a great program for food service employees, buildings and grounds, those positions that are hard to fill in your district that require under a less than a bachelor's degree. Next slide, please. These are the resources I talked about. You don't have to use her, but this is the attorney that we use, Michelle. She's phenomenal. She's with Vogel out of Minneapolis. And then Claire and Dan Johnson, Phil-Am Partners, phenomenal. They'll do all the work on the Filipino accreditation, getting your Filipino teachers able to fulfill all they need to do prior to leaving the country. They'll help you with recruiting. They'll help you with life onboarding of your Filipino talent, and they help really with any of your talent. They're just amazing human beings. I highly recommend them. They're currently in Fargo, but have been working with a number of Twin Cities districts now, as well as us. Costing, I don't want to give too much of a cost on this because it'll vary based on your attorney. Think in the range of $8,000 to $12,000 per candidate. $8,000 would be on the lower end of that with non-expedited services. I always expedite the service, and that includes your attorney and the USCIS fees. If you do expedited, which I would recommend, think about $10,000 and then 12,000-ish. Just depends on Dan and Claire's fees there, but that's about how much for Filipino teachers, and that's not yearly. That's your one time for your visa. I think it's money well spent. May seem like a big number, but when you look at your unfilled vacancies, you look at morale, you look at what you're paying in sub costs, and you looked at what you're paying to contract out some of these positions, I think it's well worth that. So with that, today was meant to just give you a high level overview, but I'm happy to field any questions. Lori, you've seen me do this a number of times. Is there anything I missed that you think I should elevate?
No, I thought you did a great job. We do have a question in the chat from
Okay.
Susan that I don't think you talked about around what staffing needs did you identify to support the international candidates? Did you add FTE to someone's current job to support them? How do you do that? And well, maybe this is something that you didn't say. So you're picking folks up at the airport today. When will they start work with you, Brenda? Because
Oh,
I
good
hyperventilate
question.
every time you
I
ask or
appreciate
you answer that.
because you know my answer.
I
I'll
know
take
your
that one
answer.
first, Lori, and then I'm delighted to answer Susan's too. So we'll pick up tonight. They'll get settled into their apartment. We will give them a ride to work. Tomorrow we'll bring them to our HR. They'll be onboarded tomorrow. We'll bring them to the bank. We'll bring them to the Social Security office. We'll get them a SIM card. They buy that, but we take them. And they meet their principal and see their classroom, and then they will be teaching on Thursday. So what we do is we also do a shadow. So on Thursday they'll shadow, and Friday we'll have pushed in supports like the coach, etc. that's in there, but they'll be teaching Friday. I call this pathway to independence.
Like,
I know, but it really works. Honestly, you get them in, you get them moving. In the ideal world, now next year, Fridley probably won't have late arrivals because we'll be able to start that and get them here on time. But it does give Lori, I know, heart palpitations when I talk about that, but there's no need to delay that. Get them in, get them started, get them going. With respect to FTEs and who does this work, I'll be honest with you, I've done a lot of the work. My special ed director and assistant director have taken a big part of that work and have done that. It's not too much extra work, honestly, for your HR team. They just work with your lawyer, Dan and Claire, etc. I have not chosen to add staff in Grand Forks. Just for perspective, there's almost 50 international teachers there, haven't added staff. Here in Fridley, we haven't added staff, but that means like today, getting 4 people from the airport and the luggage and everything. We have our special ed director, our assistant director, and the principal. One principal is going there, even though it's from 4 buildings, but we've also had people help to provision the apartments. So we rely a lot on people stepping up to the plate and helping us to do it. But from the infrastructure side, if you work with an attorney, they'll do a lot of the work for you on that. They'll do all the work for you on the paperwork and the legal side. So it seems like a lot of work. And again, I talk about it in a way that I've done it so many times differently, but it's doable. Please don't get nervous that this is going to be excessive workload. I can help you with that too, and just think through how to do that.
I think the other piece, at least for me, as I think about it, with Susan's question, is that as teachers are stepping into the classroom, it's their first time in a Fridley classroom. But when you indicated you have 9 years of teaching experience as kind of your threshold, I'm less concerned about. I mean, they have 9 years of experience. So classroom management, connections with kids, they have that. It's not like a first-year teacher and a teacher coming from an international location. So
yeah, good question from Ariana. I hope I said your name right there. Can you share successes you have seen in smaller rural communities? What additional considerations would you plan for if looking to implement in 1,000-student school in a rural community? Ariana, you're my Lake City friend, right?
yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So very good question. So interestingly enough, things you can do there are have the talent pay your teachers to drive them. So that's something that we have done, where Grand Forks, while 7,600, it is rural, they just pay as a carpool and they pay for the teacher to drive them, and they just arrange that and the teacher gets paid to do that. Also, I'll be honest, within the first 6 months in Grand Forks, several of the teachers bought cars because when we think of people moving in internationally, we forget, I won't say forget, subconsciously, we're like, oh my gosh, how did they do this? But remember, they're coming in with the same salary as everybody else too. So I would just think creatively around that. If there's also situations where they need to live further out, try to find, if you don't have rentals right close by there in Lake City or something like that. Again, I just don't want you to get into a position where your talent becomes a burden to domestics, because then that will push your program down. People want to help in the beginning and then it becomes burdensome. But I would say in Lake City, you know that I'm from Plainview, right? Yes. So I know what you're talking about. I was born in Lake City. But anyway, as we think through that, I'd be happy to talk with you about that too individually, or if there's a number of soups that in HR people that want to talk about that. I think there's different ways that we can do that, but we do have to be creative. The biggest issue you're going to have is the transportation. And even if you have in the city of Lake City rentals, it might be too far for them to walk to work too. So I think it's doable. In fact, in North Dakota, most of those places are crazy rural, and they've had really good success with that too. But I just would caution you, don't use community volunteers or things like that, because the newness and the freshness wears off, and then there's hurt feelings. And all of a sudden there's a narrative that the international teachers are a burden. Happy to talk with you offline though.
Thank you
Here's
for all
another
that.
thing.
That was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another thing to keep in the back of your mind, it's kind of related to what Brenda said about North Dakota and some of those places being crazy rural. I've seen some things recently in Ed Week around school districts that are choosing to create housing for teacher candidates as a way to draw them to their district. And I know my daughter-in-law lives in Makoti, North Dakota, which is literally you go to Bismarck and you turn right and drive another hour and a half. And they, at their school, several years ago, built 4 units literally across the street from the school. So if teachers wish to, they can live there for a modest rental amount, but maybe that's another path to explore if there's areas in your community. You're muted, Brenda, but your lips are moving, so I think you're
Sorry
talking.
about that. A very good point, Lori. As you were saying that, I remembered in some of the school districts that are reservation schools in North Dakota, they provide housing for all staff. Some it's free, some they charge rent. So again, to Lori's point, I think that's a really good solution. I just caution you, do not do that for free. So don't have anything that an international gets that a domestic doesn't, because that's going to create tension for you. And be careful on your landlords. Some are not international friendly.
You mentioned, Brenda, at the presentation that you did at the symposium, you said it a little bit more bluntly around your willingness to have conversations about race. Can you talk about that just briefly? I know we're at 10:03, so I don't want to go long, but I thought that was important.
Yeah. The blunt reference Lori is referencing here is, if you're not willing to have those conversations about race, please don't bring international talent. So what I mean by that is, and I say this, I haven't had to say it here. I probably just jinxed myself, but I said it a lot in Grand Forks of, is this an issue with teacher quality, or is this an issue with race? And I will tell you, in North Dakota, the stronger the accent, which pause, I'm laughing because I heard Grand Forks, North Dakota accent all the time. So I'm like, you people are taking out people with accents when you know, it was just funny. But anyway, the stronger the accent, the more racism they experienced. So that's something, be very prepared and stand in front of that, set it up and send the message that not in my school district, we're not going to be doing that. Now, would you maybe have a performance issue with an international talent? Of course you might, but make sure you figure out real quickly, is this a race issue or is this a true performance issue? And I bet 90% of the time it's going to be race.
And I think you mentioned the things that you did with your board and with your
Yep.
teachers union to get
Yep.
out in front of that and
Yep.
ahead of that
Yep.
and not assuming it or not waiting
Yep.
until it's a problem to deal with it.
Yeah. And thank you, Lori. I actually named it at the Grand Forks board meeting. I named it at the Fridley board meeting. I named it with the teachers union. This is what you're going to hear, board members, and this is what that racism looks like and
Mhm.
sounds like. And I expect you all to interrupt it. I was that
Mm-hmm.
direct.
And you gave them language
Yep,
around how to do that.
exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Any other questions from the group? Thanks, Ariana and Susan. Well, we know where to find you, Brenda, and I know you have
Absolutely.
been extremely responsive. And I know Darren Kerms loves working with you. So if you are a special educator or looking at, how staffing some of those federal setting 4 programs, I'm sure Darren would be happy to share how he's worked with that too. So just thank you, Brenda, for your willingness to share the learning and the ideas. And I hope others are able to find ways to implement them.
Thanks so much, Lori. I appreciate being invited. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.